Okay, I guess we start now. Okay, so here, let me share the PowerPoint and then start. So I'm very happy to meet you all, and we want to talk about Mary breaking down barriers between Muslims and Christians. And as I entitled this is just a brief review of the seminar, of the workshop. So Mary, the mother of Jesus, is deeply honored by Christians and Muslims. And so we want to explore briefly how Mary is presented in the Quran and the biblical narratives, and then also how she's depicted in both traditions. The workshops also wants to investigate what a focus on her prophethood can add to interreligious dialogue between Muslims and Christians, especially for women, but also for men. Because there are medieval Muslim discussions that look at the fact, is she a prophet or not? And while mainstream Muslims reject that notion, some Muslim feminists now are trying to retrieve these ideas and saying, if we consider her a prophet, if we can consider her a prophet, that would maybe help out to carve out space as leaders within mosques. And so that's why it's an important question for Muslim feminists. And of course, while Christians normally don't speak about Mary as a prophet, still, as we will see, Mary can be considered a prophet on account of the Magnificat and her addressing social justice issues, and especially, of course, a traditional focus on her that is mainly looking at her as her purity, at her virginity, doesn't necessarily jive with modern women's lives, even in the Middle East. And so there is a desire to see her as speaking at addressing ethical issues, which again she does in the Magnificat. And so we want to explore these questions a little bit in this workshop. So Mary, of course, is the most complex and the most nuanced woman described in the Quran. She's the only woman named in the Quran, and even in Surah 19, Surah Maryam is named after her. Hadith and tafsir literature both refer to her extensively. Now, when I refer to hadith, I mean hadith are all the words of the Prophet that are recorded in major collections, and the Sunnis believe in 6 authoritative collections, and the Shiites have their own. Tafsir, I mean the Quran commentaries. So there is a lot written about Mary in both the hadith and the tafsir. The Quran, just like the Bible, contains 2 birth narratives. One is in Surah Imran, or Surah 3, and that one is mainly in the verses 35 to 47. And that is actually a later surah than Surah Maryam. Because in the Quran is ordered chronologically, so we have the earlier ones at the end, and this is one of the later ones actually. How did I say it right now? Yeah, it's a Medinan surah, and then the second surah containing many birth narrative is Surah Maryam, Surah 19, where her giving birth to Jesus is mainly described in verses 16 to 29. There are, of course, other verses as well that refer to her. In fact, Mary's name appears more frequently in the Quran than in the New Testament. She's explicitly named in 34 verses and referred to in a total of 70 verses of the Quran. Most male prophets are not referred to as often as she is. Only the prophets Moses, Abraham, and Noah are mentioned more often than her. Now, we just want to look briefly at some of these verses. This is just a summary. So in Quran, Surah Al-Imran starts with the story of the wife of Imran, who is not named, Maryam's mother, and her sudden pregnancy. And now Miriam's mother consecrates her unborn child to God. And because she consecrates this child to God, she expects a boy. And she's surprised when then she gives birth to a girl. She names her Mariam and asks God for protection for her and for her progeny. A well-known hadith gives the answer to her request. It says, every child that is born is touched by Satan, and this touch makes it cry, except Mariam and her son. This is found in one of the 6 authoritative hadith collections in Bukhari that most Muslims would argue collected only authoritative hadith. So this hadith is very important for it has been used to form the later Islamic doctrine of impeccability, or isma in Arabic. This means immunity from sin. So it's a doctrine that came up to underline that the prophets in general, and also Maryam and Jesus, have been are immune from sin, or are sinless. Now I call Mary Maryam because that's the Arabic word. Mary is the English translation of the Latin name Maria, and the Arabic Maryam is a translation of the Hebrew Miriam, which is rendered in Greek as Maryam. And I use Mary and Maryam interchangeably. I'm not very consistent here. Now then, Surah Imran continues that after Maryam was dedicated to God, she's then placed in the temple, mihrab in Arabic, and Zachariah, the father of John the Baptist, takes care of her. And he's surprised to find her in the temple with provisions, rizq. These provisions are usually interpreted as food. So basically this means that God is taking care of her in the temple when she is placed there. Then Mary is described in Surah Al-Imran, verse 42. O Mary, indeed Allah has chosen you and purified you and chosen you above the women of the worlds. I use Sahih International for the translation. So this is a very important verse because it describes Mary as chosen, as purified. Then she's even twice. Some translations then say she's preferred over womankind, or the women of the worlds. Now, some medieval scholars assumed that this purity concerned Mary's total devotion to God, that Mary was absolutely and totally devoted to God. Other Muslim medieval scholars applied it to physical purity, or tahara in Arabic, which they interpreted as absence of menstrual blood or postpartum bleeding. Blood in some religions is seen as polluting. And as you probably know that a menstruating woman, Muslim woman, doesn't pray, doesn't fast, and doesn't touch the Holy Quran. And so some medieval scholars applied this purity now as a purity of blood. So Mary must not have menstruated. Then there's another verse here in Surah Al-Imran, the following one. O Mary, be devoutly obedient to your Lord and prostrate and bow with those who bow in prayer. So here Mary is endowed or asked to be obedient to your Lord and to prostrate and bow down with those who pray. This is fascinating, and we will talk about it a little bit later, because the question we want to ask is this a precedent? Is this a verse basically saying that Mary can lead people in prayer, other women in prayer, or even men in prayer? Because she is asked to prostrate and to pray, which is of course, prostration is of course then in connection with the ritual prayer in Islam. And then a few verses later, then an angel announces the birth of Jesus to her, and she wonders how this can happen because she's a virgin. This is similar then to the biblical account. Now, the Annunciation of to Mariam is something that obviously Muslim artists have celebrated and depicted as well. Now we move to Surat Maryam, so an earlier, a Meccan surah, and here the account is slightly different. Maryam withdraws to an eastern place and screens herself away from them. When all alone, the Spirit of God appears to her and announces a boy most pure. While some exegetes interpret this screening herself away again as her totally dedicating herself to God, others interpret it as Maryam putting on a veil, a hijab, and some even as her putting on a face veil, a niqab. But then after the Spirit of God announces her a boy, she withdraws to a distant place where she delivers the child. Well, she responded also, "Shall I have a boy when no man has touched me and I have not been unchaste and not been an unchaste woman?" So the Quran basically affirms a virgin birth of Mary, as traditional Christians would also affirm. Then after conceiving, she withdraws to a distant place where she delivers Jesus under a palm tree. In pain, she cries out, and the voice encourages her to shake the palm tree and eat the dates that fall down. You see here Jesus next to her, and as you saw in the earlier depiction of Mary with Jesus too, Jesus has like flames coming out to him. So this is a sign of prophethood. Normally, prophets in these miniatures are depicted with flames. Mary herself doesn't have flames here in this picture. Afterwards, she's informed to make a vow of silence. Then upon returning to her people, she's addressed as sister of Aaron and accused of immorality. Because she had vowed silence, she points to the newborn baby, and the Quran reports how Jesus speaks as a newborn to defend her chastity. This is a miracle of Jesus, that he defends his mother when she's accused of immorality that is not contained in the New Testament. This is a different story that Christians normally are not aware of. Then there are many other verses, as I mentioned earlier, that she's described in, especially Surah Al-Ma'idah, Quran 5 describes her as a godly woman. Then Surah 66 describes her as one of the pious, and Surah 23 together with Jesus as a sign. And then in these verses here, Maryam is presented as chaste and together with Jesus as rejecting the Trinity. So there are many, many verses. As I said, she's referred to directly in 34 verses and a total of 70 verses in the Quran, much more than in the New Testament. Now, Mary in the New Testament, I'm sure you're aware of how the New Testament describes her. It's very brief. The Gospel of Matthew puts the focus more on Joseph, and especially his genealogy is looked at. It's the Gospel of Luke that describes her as reflecting very deeply and pondering every so often. And all the Gospel narratives underline spiritual parenthood as more important than biological parenthood. When she goes and visits Jesus with his brothers, Jesus says, "Who are my brothers? The ones who listen to me and who follow me." And she gets quite rudely rebuked or rudely rejected, or so it feels to us. And in Acts, then Mary is praying with the believers of the early church. So I don't want to say more about this now. Now, of course, Mary has been deeply venerated by Christians through the ages. And many Christians have shown deep devotion to her. And this appeared from the early years of the Christian faith until the modern era, until now, at least among Catholic and Orthodox Christians. And this is, of course, evident in many shrines, pilgrimage sites, icons, feast days, artwork, hymns, music. innumerable churches and other institutions that are named after her, or Notre Dame, Our Lady of, etc. And I'm sure all of you can give many examples of that. Now, there are biblical grounds for this veneration of Mary. And again, I don't want to go into those because probably most Mennonites don't abide by them anyhow. The four Catholic dogmas embraced, the four Marian dogmas embraced by the Catholic Church focus on the first one is divine motherhood. And this basically underlines that Mary was conceived by the Holy Spirit. And it's more or less all Christians, Protestants including, Mennonites included, most of them who would affirm this doctrine. Then the second one is the idea of her perpetual virginity. That one is not affirmed in the Bible, but also articulated in the Proto-Evangelium of James. And it basically underlines that she was a virgin her whole life, and that even giving birth did not take away her virginity. And when the Bible speaks about her brothers, they're seen as other relatives, maybe cousins or sons or children of Joseph from a previous marriage, but not as her children. So this doctrine is upheld by the Catholic Church and embraced by Orthodox Christians. But its justification mainly comes from the Proto-Evangelium of James. And then we have the Immaculate Conception, which was proclaimed as doctrine only in 1854. This maintains that she was fully holy and born sinless. This also was articulated in the Proto-Evangelium of James. And then the last one, the Assumption of Mary, because nowhere is it stated how she passed away, how she died. And so this is assumed because she was assumed to be sinless, that she was assumed into heaven in a similar way as some Old Testament prophets. This was proclaimed as doctrine relatively late, only in 1950. Now, the Orthodox don't quite, with this one, they have disagreements with the Catholics, and they kind of see it differently. But I don't want to go into that. Now, what is the Proto-Evangelium of James? It's counted as Christian Apocrypha and thus not accepted as canonical, as part of the canonical Bible. Now, the Proto-Evangelium of James comes from the later part of the 2nd century. It's attributed to James, but the author is actually unknown. And it contains many stories about Mary that well, clearly we have not, that the Quran picks up, and that also are embraced by Catholics. Now, this is the miracle of, I can't see the top line here, the miracle of that happened on the flight, during the flight to Egypt. This is a depiction of one of these apocryphal stories that we have in the Quran with Mary holding the palm tree. Now, in this story, Jesus commands the palm tree to give fruit when the family is hungry on their journey to Egypt. So this depiction comes from Spain from about 1476. And this is just a brief outline here. We have Luke 1-2, and then the Quran, Surat Maryam, Surat 19, the Proto-Evangelium of James, and Quran 3, Surat Al-Imran. And you see that quite a few stories from the Proto-Evangeliums of James are picked up in Surat Al-Imran. The palm tree story comes from, is in the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. That is not found in the Proto-Evangelium of James. But just you see a little bit how obviously in the milieu where the Quran came to be together, these stories must have circulated among the Christians. When I talk about Mary to Muslims, and I had a conversation with this Sheikh Mufti Kamaluddin Ahmed, I asked him, how do you use Maryam in your spirituality? I asked him once, and he said that Maryam, he very much likes Mariam, and that she's invoked for her chastity and her faith in God and her worship of God. And he counted her as one of the greatest women in Islam. And he told me he prays regularly, let our women become like Mariam. Now, when I talked to some Muslim women, they said to me, Mariam is always taken only as an example for women. They thought men learn a lot about Mariam too, because as she obeyed God so openly and so sincerely, men could learn from her as well. Now, Sheikh Kamal ad-Din was very influential at the East London Mosque in the UK. He established the Mariam Center at the East London Mosque in 2013. And this is one of the biggest mosques in Europe, accommodating up to 7,000 worshippers. So Mary definitely is important for Muslims. Now, before we go into the prophethood, what is Marian spirituality? What is the shared ground? And also, what are the points of differences that can come up when we talk about Mary? Here I want to give some examples, mainly from the Arab world, but not only. So in Egypt, in 1968, a Muslim saw Mary, an apparition of Mary above a church in Zaytun, a neighborhood of Cairo in Egypt. And for 2 years, she irregularly appeared there. And this was a time in Egypt of a lot of national stress. It was only 10 months since the Egyptian defeat of the Six-Day War with Israel, and there were tensions between Muslims and Christians. So these apparitions of Mary that were first seen by a Muslim brought thousands of people to Zaytun from both faiths together. And Mary was welcomed by Muslims and Christians as a caring mother, giving hope, peace, and unity, even though each community appropriated her in their own way. For Christians in Egypt, these apparitions were very important because they confirmed a historic relationship of Mary with their homeland, which they often they like to sometimes give Egypt as the Arab Holy Land. And of course, Egyptian Christians like to go to this passage in Isaiah where it says, "Blessed be Egypt, my people." We, of course, also know that the Holy Family fled to Egypt. And according to tradition, the Holy Family stayed for several years in Egypt and traveled through the country, blessing many places. One such place is, and to talk about Egyptian nationalism, this icon here, which is the cathedral in Abbasiyah, Cairo, has an obelisk so as a national symbol of Egypt, and of course the River Nile, the pyramids. There are many symbols here of, you have an almost pharaonic boat, many symbols representing Egypt as a nation country. On their way to Egypt, the Holy Family stopped in Matareya, which is also a neighborhood of Cairo by now. And this tree is an old sycamore tree, where and the Holy Family rested under the shade of this tree, according to tradition. It is called Mariam's tree. So this site attracts many visitors, especially barren Muslim and Christian women. So Mary is seen as a symbol of fertility in popular Muslim piety. So Surat Maryam is also recited by women struggling to conceive. It is recited during pregnancy, childbirth, and the blessing of a mother and her newborn baby. So Mary is very important in this shared spirituality. Now there is also a film, part comedy, part documentary of an Egyptian who lived in France, who wants to go back to Egypt to make sure to see if these stories are true. So La Vierge, les Coptes et moi. it's a little bit, as I said, half comedy. And because he doesn't find any, what he calls scientific things, he recreates the apparition of Mary in a Christian village. Anyhow, now let's move to Lebanon. Lebanon has a massive statue of what is called Notre Dame du Liban, Our Lady of Lebanon, which was inaugurated in 1907. And sometimes she's referred to as the Queen of Lebanon in Harissa. Harissa is a mountain overlooking the Bay of Juni, about 20 kilometers north of Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. This site is very loved, especially by Maronite Christians, and a lot of Muslims also go here for pilgrimage. In fact, they even have their own sort of room there where they can go and do their own prayers. Maryam or Saint Mary, Maryam al-Muqaddisa, the Holy Mary, is also important, is especially important for Shiite Muslims. And there is a 2-hour Iranian film giving the Muslim their perspective on Mary as well. Now, Lebanon also made the Feast of Annunciation on the 25th of March, a national holiday in Lebanon in 2010. It was much loved and brought Muslims and Christians together. And Tanya Cassis sings the Ave Maria, accompanied by the Adhan, for the inauguration of that national holiday. And I want to play it now. And no, so we go back to, we just share, is it this one? No, yeah. Yeah, this, no. Here, I need to find my, I can't. Okay, let's just go here and go here. Just a moment, I'm sorry. And now I go back here to the PowerPoint. No, I need to, yeah, I'm slow. Excuse me. I need to find here. Now I have it. Okay, share it. And now I want to play to you a little bit. So we have Tanya Cassis, a Christian who sings the Ave Maria, and 2 Muslims who sing the Adhan, the call to prayer.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا
Oh, now I need to go. I need to stop it. Sorry. I'm here. So I hope you could hear it. Yeah, it's really beautiful, isn't it? I think it's very beautiful. And it obviously brought it brought Muslims and Christians together in Lebanon. Of course, we can critically say Islam, of course, is represented by 2 Muslim men, and Christianity is represented by a woman, of course, again. And look how she was dressed in comparison to the men. But we don't want to go there. We just want to appreciate it for bringing national unity, for bringing Muslims and Christians together. Yeah, I want to go back to the PowerPoint here. Now, where is it here? And now I need to go down again, just a moment. Yeah, let's just go like this. Where were we? Okay. Here we are. Now, in Lebanon also, another example from at a different level, a judge in February 2018 ordered 3 young Muslim men to memorize verses about Maryam, speaking about Mary and Jesus, because they had insulted Christianity. And the judge saw Maryam as a breach and thought these young men who had insulted the Christian faith would, by memorizing these verses, would become more tolerant and more appreciative of it. So this is a very different example of how Mary was used in Lebanon in a Muslim context. On a very different level now, a much more negative example. After the reconquest, there are, of course, instances where Christians have thought to use Mary to their own advantage in relations to Muslims. After the reconquest of Spain, which was completed in 1492, many mosques were converted into churches and dedicated to Mary, because her body was seen as a bridge for converting sacred space. So the example I give here is the mosque, which actually it was a Visigoth church, which was after the Muslim conquest of Spain changed into a mosque. And it's very famous for its beautiful architecture inside, and which was then in 1236 changed into a cathedral, and the name of it, the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Assumption. So it's one of the titles of Mary, because Mary's body was seen as a bridge for converting sacred space. So Mary was used to change mosques into churches. Also, for many centuries, Mary was invoked to support Christians who were captured by Muslim armies and forced into slavery to help them resist conversion to Islam. She has been invoked in mission efforts to persuade Muslims to convert to Christianity as well. And the famous Cantiga de Santa Maria, a late 13th century collection of poems, tells the story of a Muslim who promises to consider converting to Christianity if he would witness a miracle. As he looks as an icon of Mary with her child, she starts to lactate. And in response, she converts immediately. Now, there are other examples. At the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, the advancing Ottoman fleet was destroyed by an alliance of Catholic European powers. And that was a very important battle for Europeans because the Ottomans had besieged the capital of Austria, Vienna, several times. And Europeans were afraid that Muslims would overrun Europe from the east. So the victory of these Catholic European powers over the Ottoman fleet at the Battle of Lepanto was perceived as miraculous, and so it was attributed to Mary, and it gave Mary a big boost. So we have here a 17th century representation of Mary holding a sword with the Battle of Lepanto depicted behind her, expressing her military prowess and might. The Christ child is holding the severed head of a slain Turk. And the sword referred to in the Gospel of Luke that was to pierce Mary's heart is here used to kill Muslims. So it's quite a shocking depiction. The Battle of Lepanto left a deep legacy of Mary giving victory over Muslim enemies. And internally, Europe was, of course, going through the Reformation. Our Lady of Victory, as she was called then, was also used against Protestants, replacing a far more ironic Mary venerated in earlier times. Now, of course, the idea of Mary actively fighting on behalf of Christians was claimed, goes back to the 5th century when Byzantine Christians invoked Mary for military victory against enemies. So it goes back a long time. It also resurfaces in recent years as some websites and blogs appear to encourage Catholics to pray for Our Lady of Victory and recite the Rosary in order to defeat Islamic terrorism. This is a modern depiction of this. Our Lady of Victory mosaic that is now also celebrating Pope Pius V, Mary and the Battle of Lepanto, which was only made in 1954. And you see Mary in the middle, and then in behind Muslim boats, Ottoman boats, I should rather say. So I have given you now a couple of negative examples and a couple of positive examples of Marian spirituality. And now I want to ask the question, what can a focus on prophethood add? I mean, Mary, especially the focus on her virginity and her purity, has been sometimes, or at least some writers, even from Egypt, are saying it is so far removed from the struggles of everyday women's lives that women find it far more easy to connect with other saints than Mary, even though the Bible so talks about her so often, and so does the Holy Quran. Now, we want to just briefly, I'm seeing the time is running, what can a focus on prophethood add to this discussion? And could that give us maybe a different approach to dialogue? Of course, we can dialogue about the verses in the Bible and the verses in the Quran, but we could also, when we look at prophethood and how she talked about it, it puts or at least in my opinion, puts the discussion on a different level. So one of the early Muslims, and as you see, Ibn Hazm, who is very known for his anti-Christian polemics, who lived in Muslim Spain, was actually a proponent of Mary being a prophet, and he died in 1064. He argued that Maryam received a word of God. That's what Quran 3:45 says. And he says, for this reason, Mary is a prophet because she received a word of God. Because prophets received words of God in Islam. And of course, he's not the only one who argues that Mary was a prophet. And we want to look just very briefly at some of the arguments, although I don't want to go too deeply into this. The majority of Muslims are against it. And they say that in Surah Yusuf, it says, "We did not send forth before you except men." And the word for man is rijal, men. And so based on this, many Muslims, or the majority of Muslims, say there can be no women prophets. Now, Ibn Hazm distinguishes between messengers, Rasul, and prophets, Nabi. And he distinguishes it in, where do I have this here? Just a moment. Now I'm confused. Yeah. I'm sorry that I'm taking here a moment. So Ibn Hazm distinguishes between prophets, nabis, and messengers, rasul, because a nabi is I just can't find it, and I seem to have lost it. Where do I have it? Even according to him, women can be prophets, but not messengers. But most Muslim scholars distinguish between messengers and prophets, but not all do. And a certain Ibrahim Zaki, who also wrote on this issue, and who is very much against, who is a contemporary Muslim teaching at some university in the US, and he's against the notion that women can be prophets. He says the Quran doesn't actually distinguish between the two. Or those who want to make the point that women can be prophets, it's in their interest to distinguish. So prophets can receive a word from God and a book from God. And now Ibn Hazm interprets the verse where the Quran says Maryam received a word from God as her, this including her being a prophet. But even according to him, Mary cannot be a messenger. And here I answered the following question already. Now, Mary is also described in the Quran as receiving provisions in the temple, rizq, food, or that's usually interpreted as food. Now, can receiving provisions be categorized as a miracle or a wonder? Miracles are attributed to prophets and wonders to saints. And now Ibn Hazm again categorizes this as a miracle and Al-Hakim at-Tirmidhi as a wonder. So again, it depending how you categorize provisions, then Mary could be counted as a prophet or not. Ibn Hazm uses the claim that prophets are perfect to support his view of Maryam as a prophet. And he uses the hadith that there are many perfect men, but none among women except Maryam, the daughter of Imran and Asya, who is a woman called in the tradition Pharaoh's wife. Here I want to, because time is running, I will cut out this one here. Now, what is one contemporary Muslim scholar, a Lebanese scholar, who wrote this book on Mary in the Quran, and she very much believes that if Mary could be claimed as a prophet, she could be a precedent for helping contemporary Muslims find more spaces into mosques and also get leadership in the mosques. So she recognizes, here just a small sample here, she recognizes in Mary an important link in a genealogically determined chain of prophets. And she also sees Mary's matrilineal name as a proof of her prophethood. And she identifies Miriamic traits of prophecy in Mary. So she connects her with the Hebrew Miriam, who is actually the first woman prophet named in the Hebrew Bible. And she, of course, uses Ibn Hazm's arguments as well. Now, earlier I mentioned this Quranic verse, prostrate yourself and bow down, those who bow down. Can Mary and women in general lead others in prayer? That's what I want to look at with this here. Now, Muhammad Jalaluddin al-Qasimi, who died in 1914, answered this question positively. He thought women, yeah, just a moment. Yeah. He believed that Mary can lead others in prayer. And he quoted the medieval theologian Suyuti, who said, because of Mary, women are qualified to lead in prayer. But he had a problem. Al-Qasimi also argued that this role was only limited to Mary and that it couldn't be generalized for other women because of menstruation and other female conditions. But thanks to Mary's perfection, because she is described as perfect, she alone could rise above the status of ordinary women and be counted among men. So Al-Attar, a Persian poet, then wrote, when a woman becomes a man in the path of God, she's a man and one can no longer call her a woman. The first man to enter paradise would be Mary, the mother of Jesus. Now, her perfection then has allowed her to reach the exalted status of manhood. But of course, this example doesn't help contemporary women who seek to cover leadership roles within mosques. And so we know that in 2007, the African-American Muslim convert to Islam, Amina Wadud, led a group of mixed group in prayer. And now, to justify this step, it is very important for Muslims to find historical precedents. If you can find historical precedents, then you can find a justification for new contemporary practices. Because in Sunni Islam, there is this fear of innovation or bid'ah. You cannot innovate, you need to follow the tradition. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, for example, is often deemed, is an Egyptian who lives in Qatar. He's often kind of labeled as a global mufti. He, for example, considers Amina Wadud's leading mixed congregation in prayer in New York in 2006, as innovation and unacceptable. So that's why it's so important to find historical precedents. Now, I could add many more points that Ibn Hazm made, especially since he was a Zahiri. He belonged to the Zahiri law school, and the Zahiri law school was a very literalist law school that actually died out. And he was in Muslim Spain, and so some scholars argue that women must have been a more elevated status in Spain than in the Muslim East, and so that's why he is for the prophecy of women. He doesn't just believe Mary was a problem. He names several other women who he also believes were prophets. Whereas then Maribel Fierro, a Spanish scholar in Islamic studies, she argues this. She doesn't believe this and argues against it, and says that even in Spain, the question, can women be prophets, was controversial, and not everybody followed Ibn Hazm and a couple of others who believed it. Plus, there were some scholars in the East also who made the same point, that she could be counted as a prophet. Secondly, also, she argues that it's very likely that the focus on discussions of prophethood of women in Spain she argues it came out of a desire to accommodate Christian converts to Islam, showing them that indeed Mary has a high place among us as well, and has nothing to do with any other question. Anyhow, now, when we talk about Mary and Mary in Christianity, normally we Christians do not speak about Mary as a prophet. Rather, she's referred to as the mother of Jesus. Now, what can a focus on prophethood add in Christian discussions? And of course, we have the Magnificat, which is the Latin for Mary's song in Luke 1. And just as a brief thing here, brief quote, "He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He has put down the mighty from their thrones and exalted those of low degree. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent empty away." In Luke's gospel, she is named Mariam, actually, underlining her Jewish identity and also her connection with Miriam, the sister of Aaron, in Exodus 20 to 21. And of course, we have to think that Mary could only sing this Magnificat because she was aware of the history of her people, of her Jewish people. Only because of that was she able to sing this song. Anyhow, now Luke does not call her a prophet ever. It is thought that Luke refrained from calling her a prophet because of her virginity, because in the Roman Greek world of his time, virginity was connected with ecstasy and sometimes possession. And he wants to make sure that her conceiving of the Holy Spirit is not the same as was around in the Greek Roman culture around him. That she was not forced, that it was the Holy Spirit. And so we, in summary, say that for Luke, Mary is a virgin explicitly and a prophet implicitly, but he doesn't name her as that. Similar actually to the Quran, when Schleifer summarizes it aptly, she says, Mariam has the attributes and the experiences of prophets, and there is no satisfactory argument against it. Thus, she should be logically classified as a prophetess, although this should not be regarded as proven beyond dispute. Early church fathers had no problems in naming Mary a prophet, as for example Eusebius, and Catholic feminist theologians underline Mary's prophetic ethical voice in the Magnificat in speaking justice to power. And we could elaborate on that. Her courage to obey God and to accept a very unusual situation, and not the passivity that was underlined earlier. So a far more active person. As a conclusion here, I wanted to say that now we could again talk much longer about this, and I'm trying to be a little bit brief here. So we need to note that that even though Mary has a substantial role in both Christianity and Islam, and even though there are good grounds in both religions to accept her as a prophet, in neither faith is she a central figure. She is secondary in Christianity to Jesus, and in Islam she is eclipsed by the Muslim women of the early Islamic community who fit Islamic models of womanhood to a far greater degree. Actually, in one of the Quranic verses that I quoted, she was the preferred woman of her time, or the chosen woman of her time. Muslim theologians discussed, what does it mean of her time? Is she only the best woman of her time historically? Of course, that would mean before the arrival of Islam. So a pre-Islamic woman in some sort. Now, of course, Muslims believe that Islam in the form of Abrahamic religion, the Hunafa and all that, was present before the very coming of Islam. But then others believed that she was only, well, as I said, chosen for her time, whereas some other Muslim theologians believed she is the chosen woman of all times. So even there we have quite a variety of discussions. This hadith here that I put down notes that the women of Quraysh is the tribe, an Arab tribe that was around Mecca. The women of Quraysh are the best of those who ride camels, and Mary never rode a camel. While Muslim scholars interpret this in various ways, it does point out the fact that Mary lived in a different time and place. But instead of this being a negative factor, it can make interreligious dialogue focused on her more productive and less divisive than if it is focused on the more central figures. So what might interreligious dialogue focused on Mary, and especially her prophethood, lead to or look like? Yeah, I have 5 points here. I believe that the focus on Mary, the prophet now, can bring Muslims and Christians together to talk about the deeply honored woman we share in our scriptures. And the focus on her prophecy can broaden and deepen these discussions to include contemporary concerns relevant to all Muslims and Christians. So it can broaden and deepen these discussions and obviously bring in more feminist ideas and voices. Third, the focus on Mary the prophet challenges the image of Mary as the embodiment of a perfectly submissive woman. Catholic and Orthodox Christians and Muslim women often have difficulty taking Mary as a model, inasmuch as her perfection and purity place her beyond the lives of ordinary women. Mary the prophet circumvents this to some degree. It also challenges Protestant Christians to take her more seriously. She becomes a social justice fighter, I guess, or woman working for just society. Mary the prophet has an ethical voice and a message for the world. This ethical voice challenges Muslims and Christians to submit to God and work for social justice to empower the poor. For Christians, a focus on Mary the prophet with an ethical voice can bring Christians from all denominations together. A focus on Mary the prophet reduces a focus on the doctrinal beliefs which separate Christians, and the Christian witness can become more unified. And of course, we can also have interesting discussions with Muslims. And Mary the prophet has a great potential to bring Muslim and Christian women together by inspiring them to lead active lives in the faith, opening the door for leadership roles within the mosque and the church. And then Mary the prophet also challenges Muslim and Christian men to listen to her ethical voice. Mary the prophet deepens belief in God who is beyond human understanding and uses all people to point to his love for the world and humankind. So I want to end with this and hear your perspectives on it.
Yes, thank you, Jacqueline. Very, very interesting. I agree with your conclusion. I'm wondering your thoughts on the idea that I think maybe some Protestant Christians have, that it's the actual veneration of Mary that has contributed to some of the misunderstandings that are given voice in the Quran, and like Al-Ma'idah 5:116, in which Jesus is asked, did you agree that you and your mother would be placed as gods alongside Allah? And Jesus says no. So this idea that Mary is actually a part of the Trinity, yeah, how does this play into this this idea that we should take Mary more seriously, when perhaps Protestants say, oh, that's caused some problems in our history?
Well, first, of course, Catholics in relation to Muslims often thought they were closer to Muslims because they share this Marian spirituality. And Protestants thought themselves they were closer to Muslims because they focus on sola scriptura, or the scriptures alone, and of course rejected then this kind of Marian worship. Or, I mean, the Catholics wouldn't call it worship. They use different vocabulary, but still. So each, what I find interesting, especially Presbyterians, who of course were very involved in the Middle East, they thought that they were closer to Muslims on account of working with the scriptures alone. But to your other question here about Mary being seen as part of the Trinity, there are different theories, of course, but she's referred to as Mother of God. And so you have the Holy Trinity, Jesus, the Mother of God, mentioned in the Quran, and then God. And so for some Muslims who are not very educated, they then assumed wrongly that this is how Christians would understand the Trinity. And of course, educated Muslims know that this is not the case and interpret that verse different. But this thought has been around. And then, of course, the scholars disagree as to who the Quran is reflecting, what milieu the Quran is reflecting within the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. So some think that there was a heretical Christianity present, and that some heretical ideas might have been picked up in the Quran, for example, the Trinity consisting of Mary, God, and the Holy Spirit. And of course, this is anathema for Muslims. To assume that God would have relations, this is just horrible. And so this is very rejected. But then there are also scholars who claim that the Quran is actually not reflecting heretical Christianity, but Orthodox Christianity, Orthodox with a small o, Orthodox Christianity. Sidney Griffiths is one of them, and there are others. And that that Quranic engagement Yeah, what do you think? My connection is unstable. What do you think, Peter, and the others too?
No, I think what you said is helpful. That there's even disagreement about whether the Quran is addressing what we would consider Orthodox Christianity or not, or whether it's addressing something heretical. And maybe that question is not actually pertinent to what you are arguing. Even aside from all of that, if we can deepen our understanding of Mary as a prophet, it would be helpful to all of us, Muslims and Christians. So I think that's a really interesting and fruitful thesis. Thank you for offering it so well. And the video from Lebanon was very moving. I want to check it out.
Good.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much for this. It's, I think, opens up some wonderful common ground, both for women who seek to build bridges, let's say Christian women who have some kind of leadership in the church with Muslim women and have opportunities to be encouraging their voices and their leadership. So this is inspiring for me to think about using Mary as a bridge, and you spoke about her as a bridge in terms of the body and the church or the sacred space. So it's another kind of bridge. So that fits so well with this conference and the overall themes of the conference. I wondered if, since the focus in our understanding of Mary as bringing a prophetic message, with the Magnificat, it focuses on her capacity to speak and to sing. Are there any references at all to her not only receiving a word of God, but in the ways in which she articulates? You know, I was trying to think, there was so much packed in. So maybe you could specifically speak to that, Jacqueline, or Peter could.
Yes, there is those who are against, like Ibrahim Zaki, who is against the prophethood of women. He's arguing her receiving a word cannot be counted as a prophethood because the word, first, she would need to have a public role. And of course, the veiling and the segregation doesn't allow for that so much in that is argued. So she needs to have a message. And what was her message in the Quran? You know, that's the question. And Zaki Ibrahim says she has no message. Whereas for Ibn Hazm, there is a message. And there is another Muslim scholar called Murad, who is arguing that Mary's message was a child. She got a child. Now, and he points, to Quran. So, and in the Quran, of course, 4:171 and also 345, Jesus is then referred to as the Word of God. And so can we argue, of course, I can't be a Muslim theologian because I'm a Christian, can we argue that is that a message then, Jesus? Okay. And now, of course, so, of course, this phrase does not mean that Jesus would share an essence with God in the same way that Christians understand it. But Jesus is understood as a prophet in Islam, in line with other prophets, who of course, predict the coming of Muhammad. There are several passages in the Quran where Jesus predicts the coming of Muhammad. So it's a Muslim prophet. Mary is also a Muslim, of course, as in Quran 61:6. So I suppose I would argue that Jesus is a message, and that this word that Mary received has content, and it was given to a people, because that's also an argument, that the word you receive must be given to a people. You must be a warner to be classified as a prophet. Yeah. So now I did focus, just as a corrective, I did focus on to show the problematic history of using Mary. Of course, historically, was that her body was seen as a bridge, and so for converting sacred space, or even as a military commander, or fighting herself, which of course is very disturbing to us pacifists. But we need to name these things. Now, of course, in Eastern European regions that were then conquered by Ottoman forces, and that then ended up living under Ottoman rule, they could not maintain an image of Mary as the victorious Mary. They developed the image of the mourning Mary, or the Mary of defeat. And so they turned to her as comforting, or the one, when you look at icons depicting that, the one holding the body of Christ, the dead body on her lap, mourning for what has gone wrong, and encouraging people, I guess, not to convert, or to stay faithful to Christ. So there are many, many images for which she has been used within the Orthodox and Catholic traditions, and I only refer to very few here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
yes,
just to follow up for clarity for me around the message and being a messenger, you mentioned that this distinction between messenger and prophet was
yes,
very significant. Can you just say?
Yeah, I never.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never. I'm so sorry, because I never articulated it, and for my brain went dumb, and I just don't quite remember it here. But here, let's see if I find it now, because this is very important, and I somehow now finally found it, because my brain went empty. A messenger is somebody who brings a divine law or book. Okay, so Muhammad brought the Quran, Jesus brought the Injil, the gospel, now in singular. Muslims believe that the 4 gospels we have are not the original gospel, and that the original gospel that Jesus brought was lost. Moses brought the Torah, etc. Okay, and the prophet is simply a warner, repeating what others preached before, the message of monotheism, that people should turn to God, etc., and repent, and so on. So Mary is not seen as being a messenger, okay? But she's accepted by some, at least, as a prophet, because she's a warner. She's taken as that, but not as nobody, not Ibn Hazm or Hosn Aboud, this Shiite feminist scholar who I quoted, would take her as a messenger. Okay. So I'm very glad you bring that up again, because I failed miserably earlier here on that.
No. Actually, it is good to have it come back. I think now it helps us to see that distinction, and to think about it in terms of, okay, and someone who is offering an ethic or a prophetic word, trying to avoid message, but you quoted, you used the word ethical several times as a way of saying this can be a way of talking about the ethical, or we would say the justice dimension to our faith, as, and in that way, a connecting point. So then I wondered, to your point about the way in which Mary became this, victory figure and so problematic for us. Is this a point then of where some repentance on the part of Christians about our history can be a way to engage? And I'm just curious, both you and Peter, if you have some thoughts on how we use, look back at our own history, whether it has to do with, the Crusades or chattel slavery in the United States and the use of the Bible and all these things, that we are open in our interfaith and multi-faith dialogues to be humble and repentant about our own history. Do you have thoughts about that, how that works or does not work, and is it useful in this context? I don't know. It's a bigger question, maybe.
As a Mennonite, of course, I don't quite share the Marian, while I respect Mary very highly for what she did. I don't quite embrace the Catholic dogmas on her. And of course, the victorious Mary is part of that world. But it is something we can, maybe in our interconfessional or interdenominational dialogues, can talk about. And so, yes, why not? I think it's good to talk about. I believe that in order to have good dialogues, we need to actually address real issues and be honest and candid with love and humility. So yes, I believe that we can. So maybe with Catholics, we are often involved with various discussions with different people. And so yes, why not? Yes. So yeah, what Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking about another prophet mentioned in the Quran who is also a prophet recognized by Christians, and that's Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, who Luke tells us was actually silenced in favor of Mary and Elizabeth's testimony. And the Quran doesn't share that story exactly, but as Jacqueline referenced, Zechariah is a part of this miracle attributed to Mary of provision. He comes and witnesses that God did something amazing through her, not just the birth of Jesus, but provided for her in the temple. And it's kind of a taking aback kind of thing. So this idea that the people who are assumed to be the ones who in religious authority, to be the ones speaking for the faith, are suddenly taking a backseat to somebody surprising, I think is there in both explicitly in the Gospel of Luke, but also implicitly in the Quran. Yeah.
Now, does anybody want from those people in the garden? Does anybody want to respond or give us some thoughts of what they think? No, they just shake their heads. Yes, Janet.
Well, if I would like to ask a question of clarification regarding now women who are stepping forward to provide leadership in mosques. I understand that in Europe, there are various communities where women have taken leadership. I met a female imam from Copenhagen, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, and got to hear a little bit of her story. So I wonder what either of you who work in this, but Jacqueline first, of course, to say anything about that. I realize there would be great pushback, but what is happening now in that regard?
Well, it depends from country to country. But Amina Wadud, who I referred to earlier, she actually has been for the last 3 years in Indonesia, she's retired now in the US, and she has for the last 2 years been in Indonesia. And 2 weeks ago, she was in Leicester, just an hour away from where I live. So she gave a lecture, and I went to the lecture and had a nice chat with her. She wrote a recent book about a sort of a progressive interpretation of the 5 pillars that she presented at this occasion. Now, what I found interesting is that the event was kept very secretive, sort of. There were security concerns, and there were maybe about 20 people who attended the event. So for a famous woman like her, coming to the UK and in Leicester, which is a town with a very large Muslim population, only 20 people show up. And only people who signed up even got the address to go there. Is because in the UK, by and large, Islam is more conservative, and we do not have one mosque where women lead. But we have in Bradford now an initiative by Muslim women. Bradford is in the north, 1 or 2 hours from here, from where I live, where we have now a mosque that women organized because they wanted to have a woman's space. But on the board, the trustees, they're still males, and the one doing the prayers is prays before the women is still a male, not a female, not even for women a female. So that is in the UK, we are a little bit conservative. Now in Berlin, there is this mosque. It's also a very small mosque that a Turkish woman started. And there you have women who pray also in front of men, and a mixed congregation standing together. As Amina did in 2006 in New York. But there she did it in a church because no mosque even welcomed her. And so in Berlin, but that is also, actually we are going to visit this mosque when I'm there with my students, and they have an Egyptian imam, and it's quite fascinating to talk to him. And he's very aware that within Germany, the majority of mosques reject him, don't accept him. And for the thousands of mosques, there's just one mosque like this. So in Copenhagen, there is, as you mentioned, then I understand in Los Angeles, there is, I don't know now, but maybe 10 years ago or so, there was a group who met once a month of women who then prayed together, but not mixed. Whereas in Berlin, the mosque is called Ibn Rashid Goethe Mosque. They do mix. They mix. So it's a very small percentage of Muslims that would think that way. In fact, in the UK, a quarter of the mosques do not even have prayer space for women. Women can't even go to pray in the mosque. So in North America, mosques are on the whole more progressive, in Canada too. But it really depends on context. Peter, do you know more?
I've heard about a couple of French women who 3 years ago or so were leading prayers in a mosque here in France. But again, as you said, Jacqueline, the location was not disclosed. And they were both French converts to Islam. I'm assuming from a non-religious or Catholic background. And so they were not emerging out of the immigrant Muslim population, but were somehow trying to represent a hybrid of French sensibilities and Islam. So I think that is probably the case in a number of places in Europe, but as Jacqueline mentioned, it's not widely accepted within the Islamic communities.
Yeah. Now there is, of course, many young women who ask questions. Actually, Mary, I forgot to mention that Mary also, this Al-Qasimi also saw some medieval, actually, not Al-Qasimi, saw Mary as sort of a hermaphrodite, because she was, so Kisha Ali, who wrote this book, Sexual Ethics in Islam, who teaches at Boston University. She also wrote an article on Mary, kind of, and gave her a queer reading. And I don't recall the articles now because Mary was not married, you know, and yet had kind of like her singleness, or I don't know where I have it marked here. Anyhow, so there is quite a potential for, it's Al-Qurtubi, who died in 1273, already described Mary as a sort of hermaphrodite. I can't pronounce the word, excuse me. For her to be able to conceive through an angel, okay? That's kind of what he points out. And then Kisha Ali takes this further and then offers a queer reading of Mary. In her article, Destabilizing Gender, Reproducing Maternity. And so Mary even functions or is used in such a way by Kisha Ali. So it's quite interesting to what uses she can be put, and fascinating actually. Yeah, and I have read the article a while ago, so I can't. I have not reviewed it, so I can't speak how she does it. I can't tell you how she does it right now.
Jacqueline, I was at a mosque in Saint Louis in eastern France a couple of months ago, and the imam there was welcoming us as a group of Christians and mostly students from Bienenberg Seminary. And he was pretty traditional in most of the things he was saying, but he mentioned Mary quite proudly as an example of how Islam actually honors women, and how she played such a prominent role in the Quran and so forth. So I think it's interesting how even very traditional male leaders within Islam can sort of gravitate toward this idea that it's worth honoring women, or at least giving lip service. And
no, come on. All Muslims honor women. What are you saying? I don't. Of course, they honor their wives, their daughters, and their sisters.
Right.
Of course.
But as far as recognizing that there is a kind of feminist sensibility in some of the Christians they encounter, and that Mary plays a role in advancing that argument.
Now, unfortunately, many Muslims, especially in Christian settings, like, for example, North America or Europe, where they are a minority, are shy a little bit away of using Mary, because Mary is so claimed by Christians, and especially, of course, by Orthodox and Catholic Christians. So they rather work with a figure that is more Islamic, or like Hagar. You know, Hagar will cast out. But I sort of I'm a little sad about it, because I think Mary there's more written about Mary, there's more potential, basically. And then also, now, of course, when an imam says, like Kamal ad-Din, who I quote earlier, when he prays every day that women become like Mary, as a woman, I have reservations, because why doesn't he pray that men become more like Mary? Couldn't they learn something about Mary too? About her submitting herself freely to God. And so, of course, the focus of her virginity and her purity and all just actually goes with traditional Islam. I don't see how he would have a problem with that at all. While I mean, do you understand what I mean? And of course, every Muslim is endowed to honor women, but doesn't mean that he gives them equal role within society. That's another story. But of course, there are many different Muslims, and they see things differently. So we should never generalize anyhow. Sorry here.
Oh, thank you so much. I was just now, in terms of thinking of the prophet servant in the Bible from, let's just use Isaiah and Mary, here I am, the servant of the Lord, send me, or, right. I think, again, that for us to claim, even this opens up for me more specifically to think about the prophetic strand and Mary within that. So thank you again, Jacqueline. This has been just a very inspiring presentation, and you have worked hard this week to bring us some very good and new insights, at least for me, and the work that you did the other day with your workshop on the veil and face coverings. So you're a wonderful teacher. So thank you for sharing your background, your work, your research, and your enthusiasm with us. It's been a real treat.
Well, thank you for attending the workshop. I enjoyed discussing with you and meeting you. It would be great to see you in person, but I really appreciated that you were here and having a conversation about Mary. And may God bless you all. Thanks for attending. And thanks for the translator and the tech team. We appreciate your support and your hard work to make this possible. So thank you very much. Blessings to you.